Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to The History of Horror Cinema, a personal podcast journey through the good, bad, and ugly of the history of horror movies, based on my blog, The History of Horror Cinema. Oh, and please don't forget to hit subscribe. Frankenstein, 1910. Edison Manufacturing Company was one of those emerging American studios gaining dominance as the French influence lost ground. In 1910, they became the first to make a movie of Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, film number 664 in their kinetogram catalogue, thus presenting the first pure horror genre film ever released. Clocking in at roughly 12 minutes, it's a brief but effective introduction to the myth. Director and writer J. Searle Dowley chose to sanitize the novel's horror for the delicate sensibilities of the early viewer. The monster is portrayed as a clear manifestation of Frankenstein's primal inner self, yet the film does not shy away from a vivid creation scene, where Victor, Augustus Phillips, reverse engineers the creature from a satanic-looking flaming skeleton rather than a corpse, reviving him not with science, but almost the supernatural invocation of a demon. Frankenstein is also notable for Charles Ogle's performance as the monster. He was a veteran stage actor who, as was the custom, designed his own grisly makeup and enthusiastic physical contortions. Despite exaggerated clown shoes and absurdly extended fingers, he committed to the role wholeheartedly. There's a comedic, macabre touch in the way his arm beckons to Victor through the chamber door, as if teasing an audience through a stage front cloth before entering. Our sympathies in the 1910 film rest firmly with Victor, though. Little is given to the creature in his lonely and confused plight. Dowley removed any sense of Victor's responsibility toward his creation, or the broken promise made to build him a mate. In fact, there's a moment of farce when the monster attempts to plead with him before quickly hiding behind a curtain, when his fiancée Elizabeth, Mary Fuller, enters. Upon seeing his reflection later, the creature throws up his arms histrionically in distress and exits. In lieu of the novel's shock wedding night revenge of the monster upon his father by strangling Elizabeth, we see Frankenstein's better nature asserting itself. The creature frightens the bride and groom, but Victor is able to simply banish his tormentor's image from the mirror and be restored to his beloved's embrace. All is suddenly right with the world again. While this injects a touch of sanitizing romance, distorting Mary Shelley's moral message, the card reads, "The creation of an evil mind is overcome by love and disappears." An evil mind rather than a temporarily deranged one? Surely then the fanciful speed of this plot wrap-up can't disguise further delicious horror possibilities. Might Elizabeth be in for the pitter-patter of other satanic feet in the future? Even as a highly censored version, Frankenstein is important in heralding the beginning of the true horror film, and ushered in the regular reinterpretations of classic Gothic literature, Dracula, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, etc., that continues for each generation of audiences. The early silent horror film. As cinema entered the teenage years of the 20th century, like any adolescent, it began to experiment with boundaries. Edwin S. Porter was once again to have an influence when he hired a struggling young actor for his 1908 short Rescued from an Eagle's Nest. This was David Walk, D.W. Griffith. Porter had given him a chance to act based on his looks, finding the fledgling writer's movie scenario submissions to be over-elaborate. Little did he know that this would start D.W. on a 4-decade career as a Hollywood giant, directing such epics as the controversial Birth of a Nation in 1915 and Intolerance in 1916. In the process crafting revolutionary new shooting and editing techniques. Gone was the dull, static camera long shot simply recording the unfolding action without movement. Griffith allowed the audience to be taken from a master shot encompassing the whole landscape to a cut-in, enabling us to see characters' all-important faces and emotions in close-up. He also added new grammar and style, editing scenes to compress time and information, using multiple cameras to show us different angles on a played scene. thereby inventing what we now know as continuity editing and intercutting between parallel scenes existing at the same time. Cinema was developing a new maturity, going beyond the novelty of a basic flat recording of images into how to tell a story with increasing flair and sophistication. Film was gradually becoming an art. While Hollywood was writing the textbook for a new language of cinema as a whole, around the world filmmakers were building on the Méliès model of supplying audiences with fantasy and horror escapism. Frankenstein wasn't the only Gothic horror novel to be raided by hungry studios for its thrill and shock potential. A year after Edison's studio adapted Mary Shelley's famous work, Notre Dame De Paris, 1911, was directed in France by Albert Capellani, based on Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It bore the same name as the novel's original French title, and is believed to be the fourth filmed version. Sadly, as with the previous ones, it is lost, barring a few interesting photo stills. These depict Henry Krause's Quasimodo tortured on the pillory, Stasia Naperkowska as Esmeralda stretched on the rack presided over by Claude Gary's cruel Frollo, then the damsel saving Frollo from the hunchback's attempted revenge murder, and finally her ushering out this religious tormentor after saving him. In each, the costumes and sets authentically suggest the Middle Ages period. The actors' gestures are caught in bold expression, and Krause conveys what we see of Quasimodo's deformity via an inwardly buckled knee stance, an elevated left shoulder, and a shaggy wig with pain-racked heavy makeup. Other countries began to see the opportunities in horror cinema during these years. In 1915, Russia gave us simple but effective chills with The Portrait, V. Starovich's simplified one-reel, 9-minute dramatization of Gogol's short story, about a penniless artist, A. Gromov, who buys a painting from a dealer and, upon taking it home to his cramped little garret, finds that the portrait comes to life. Its subject, I. Lazarev, leaves the frame, stalks the room, and then suddenly vanishes, haunting the feverish young man no more. This adaptation sheds any real characterization of the artist, who in the novella is persuaded into a Faustian bargain of easy fame by the portrait. Gogol's pointed cynicism about human weakness in the face of temptation. Here he is merely a reactive quasi-victim. Levarev, though, is easily commanding as the portrait, facially resembling a demonic Milo O'Shea. We cut in for a striking close-up as the painted face turns slowly to face his owner. The otherwise traditionally static camera placement actually becomes a plus when he creeps hypnotically out of the picture frame. Russia itself would contribute to cinema language a decade later with the innovative montage editing, famously popularized by Sergei Eisenstein in Strike and Battleship Potemkin, both in 1925. Whereby a series of different images are cut together to show events and reactions from multiple sources in quick succession, condensing time and moving the plot along. Brian De Palma fans will recognize his montage editing from Battleship Potemkin in the famous train station scene in The Untouchables. The late 1910s would see a war-ravaged Western world that meant precious resources for the arts in the technologically advancing film countries such as England, France, and Germany were diverted to mobilization and then the epic task of reconstruction. This allowed America an opportunity to reign supreme as supplier of entertainment and innovator of the form until the beginning of the 1920s.